like magic? Anyone? Show of hands, who likes magic? Some of us. I really like magic. Some people don't. I like all kinds of magic, whether it's that like kind of up close card magic, where cards are flipping around and disappearing in packs, whether it's the kind of classic, someone gets put in a box and sawn into and then the box goes apart, or whether it's large scale magic. I saw this thing where David Copperfield got a whole stack of like 100 people out in an airport, and they all held sheets up around an aeroplane, and then they dropped the sheets and the aeroplane was gone, right? Like, I don't know how that happens, and that's part of the thing about, like, I can't do magic, and I don't know how magic happens, and I think that's part of the reason why I'm so attracted to magic, because I've got no idea how it happens. And sometimes I can see things, you can see a gap somewhere or a box, and you think, I kind of might have an idea. But then there's those moments where you really have no idea. The ones where you just go, hang on, there was no space for that thing to go. That thing was solid and now it's not, and it's disappeared. Those moments where it actually seems like a miracle, but of course, it's not. That's the thing about magic. It's not a miracle. No one can actually make a rabbit disappear. Magic isn't actually magic, and that's part of the attraction of you're being duped, but you don't exactly know how you're being duped. And then you read the Bible, right? And all these crazy things happen in the Bible. Miracles. Oceans divide in two and 1 million people walk across on dry land. A virgin has a baby. Water gets turned into wine right there at the party in front of everyone. A blind person sees again. A person who's been blind all their life sees again instantly. Someone walks on water. Not a little bit of water, like a whole lot of water, and someone walks across the top of it. Dead people come back to life, actual dead people, not someone who's kind of in a coma or just got hit in the head, someone who's been in the grave for days. And it's a good question for us to ask, and a reasonable question for us. Is this stuff just magic tricks? Are these just all made up stories, or is this possible? Now, I want to say that the teaching that we do here in the church, we don't usually do by request. But this is by request, because a couple of people have been asking me over a while, could we talk about miracles? Could we talk about all these miracles that we read in the Bible, or that, you hear people when they're talking before church or other, people will talk about a story they've read or someone they know. Can we talk about that stuff? How do we understand miracles? What do we do with these things, and what do they mean for us today? So we're going to spend a couple of weeks talking about miracles. And I'm going to try and answer some of the questions that you've got, and hopefully help us understand a little bit more about the weird stuff that we read in the Bible and that we hear going on in the world around us. So, grab your cape and your wand, and we're going to get started. Before we open up our Bibles, let's get clear on what a miracle is. I like this definition. A miracle is something unexplainable by natural forces that can only be explained by something supernatural. Because what that means is a miracle is not a coincidence. A miracle is not something that's just very rare, right? You winning the lottery isn't a miracle, it's just very, very rare. A miracle is not something that you feel like God did, even though it's kind of natural, right? You getting all green lights on the way to work, that's not a miracle. You might think that God did that, maybe, right? But it's not a miracle. A miracle is something unexplainable by natural forces that can only be explained by something supernatural. And our Bible story is full of these miracles. And the writers of the Bible, the language they use make it clear that for them, these are not stories. These are not exaggerations. These are not sort of analogies to make a point. The writers of the Bible present these miracles as things that actually happened. And there are all kinds of miracles in the Bible. And if you look online, there are lots of people who want to classify miracles. I'm not sure that God really classifies miracles, but there are all sorts of, sort of groups of these kinds of miracles. There are miracles where God speaks to people. Where people have an experience of something supernatural speaking into their life. There's a story right toward the beginning of the Bible where God speaks to Moses in a burning bush. You kind of heard of that story? And Moses sees a bush, and the bush is burning, but it's not burning up. Like it's on fire, but it's not on fire. And the audible voice of God comes and speaks to him. That's a miracle. There are miracles where something unexplainable happens in nature. Jesus walking on water would be one of those things, something that just by sort of the laws of physics, of nature, can't happen, and yet it appears to happen. There are lots of miracles where someone gets healed. Blind people see and lame people walk, where things happen sort of in and around the human body that just shouldn't happen, that just can't happen. A blind person cannot spontaneously see again, but there are stories where that happens. There are stories where people are raised from the dead. John chapter 11, a guy called Lazarus has been literally in the tomb for days. In fact, when Jesus says that open the tomb, he's going to raise him, people say, let's not do that because it's a bad smell in there. Like that's how long the guy's been dead for, right? The writer wants to really make it clear this isn't someone who's just sort of, maybe knocked out or unconscious. The whole idea is the guy's been dead for days. It really reeks in there. There are lots of different types of miracles, but all miracles have one thing in common. And if there's one thing I want you to take away from today, the most important thing to understand about miracles in the Bible is this. Miracles always happen to prove who God is and to prove how powerful God is. Miracles point to a God who is bigger than the world that he created. Miracles point to a God who doesn't play by the rules of this world because he's above the rules of this world. Does that make sense? And that's the point. What seems impossible to us is actually possible to God because he's not bound by the rules of the world that he created. Miracles are real, and they prove that God is real. Miracles are never about the person who receives the miracle. Now that's really hard for us because we think of the world relative to us, but the miracles are never about the person who receives the miracle. Miracles are always about God. In the book of Deuteronomy, back in the very first part of the Bible, Deuteronomy 10:21, the writer is reflecting on the story of the Exodus. The Exodus is the whole, that moment, it's all in the movies where the whole people of Israel, they come out of Egypt. Remember all the plagues, and there's the plague of blood and the gnats and the whatever, all these crazy plagues, and they come out, and then the Red Sea parts, and they walk through the Red Sea. I mean, the Exodus is sort of like it's miracles on steroids, right? It's a big story that's packed full of a whole lot of smaller miracle stories. And the writer, it's some years after that moment, and the writer is reflecting on that, Deuteronomy 10:21, and he writes this: He alone is your God, the only one who's worthy of your praise, the one who's done these mighty miracles that you've seen with your own eyes. He's saying all those miracles that happened when you came out of Egypt, they were all about God. They were all about demonstrating, they're all about showing the world that there's only one all-powerful God. They're about showing the world that there's only one who is worthy of praise. Praise, like saying there's only one being who's worthy of you looking at them and going, they are awesome. Right? That's what it means to be worthy of praise. There's only one person saying, wow, how good are they? And that person is God. Hundreds, maybe thousands of years after the writer wrote those words, Psalm 77:14 says, You are the God of great wonders. You demonstrate your awesome power among the nations. And then in that psalm, the writer goes on to talk about all the miracles that God's done sort of through history. Hundreds, maybe thousands of years after Psalm 77 was written, John writes that Jesus himself said these words, John 10:38. Believe in the evidence of the miraculous works I have done, even if you don't believe in me. Then you will know and understand that the Father is in me and that I'm in the Father. Jesus is actually saying to people, even if you don't believe me when I say I'm the Son of God, at least believe me because of the miracles you've seen. And John finishes his biography of Jesus, literally the last 2 lines of his biography of Jesus, the book of John, John 20:30. The disciples saw Jesus do many other miraculous signs in addition to the ones recorded in this book. But these are written so that you, the readers of the book of John, so that you may continue to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing in him, you may have life and power in his name. He's saying all the miracles that you've read about Jesus doing, and there were heaps more than the ones that we wrote down, none of them are about the person who received the miracle. They all happened so that you may continue to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing in him, you may have life and power in his name. Fast forward until after the death and the resurrection of Jesus, and Peter, who finds himself now the sort of the leader of this little group of Jesus followers, stands up in front of a crowd of people. You can read about it in Acts chapter 2. And Jesus says these words. He says, God publicly endorsed Jesus the Nazarene by doing powerful miracles, wonders, and signs through him. He's saying miracles are a public endorsement of the reality and the power of God. They're a way of God saying, pay attention. Listen up, folks. Miracles are supposed to make you say, wow, there is a God. Miracles are supposed to make you say, wow, this God is powerful. This God is real. This God is bigger than all the other gods. This God is worth listening to. This God is worth following. That's the message that Jesus came to share, and that's the message that you and I need to hear in our world today, right? Because we live in a world that has all kinds of voices telling us that we should follow them. That if you want to have a good life, you should hang out with these people. If you want to have a good life, if you want things to be awesome for you, you should buy this stuff. You should take this holiday. You should go to this concert. You should be seen at this cafe. You should be in this relationship. If you do all these things, you'll be happy and full and life will be good for you. Like that's the path to the life that you want. And all of us, whether we realise it or not, all of us are listening to these voices coming into our lives all the time, and we're trying to work out which are the real ones. Which are the best ones? Which are the ones that if I follow them will lead me to the kind of life that I want to live? We're all trying to work out that all the time, even if you don't realise it. With so many voices coming our way, how do we know what is the best path through life? I mean, if only there was a sign, if only there was something that would tell us this is the best way. The miracles that you read about in the Bible, the miracles that you hear about in the world today, the miracles that you hear other people in our community here at Tide talking about, those miracles are supposed to show you, and they're supposed to remind you that there's only one voice worth following. Those miracles are supposed to point to Jesus and say there's only one person that's better than everyone and everything else. There's only one path that will lead you to real, lasting, abundant life. There's only one path to your best life. Remember John's words, all these stories are written down so that you may continue to believe that Jesus is Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing in him you may have life and power in his name. Now, miracles don't happen all the time. But they didn't happen all the time in the Bible either. I mean, most people who met Jesus didn't get healed. It might not seem like that when you read the Bible, but 99.99999 whatever percent of people who died in the Bible stayed dead, right? Miracles were never a common occurrence. In a sense, miracles are never intended to be a common occurrence. They are an occasional sign to remind people, to remind us that God is real, that God is alive, that God is powerful, that God is worth listening to, and God is worth following with everything you can. When you hear someone say, "I saw God do a miracle," you're not supposed to think, "Oh, I wish that happened to me." You're supposed to think, "That's awesome. That's a brilliant reminder to me that God is real. I'm going to follow that guy." Because when you have doubts, and you will, so do I, when you're feeling low, and we all have times when we're feeling low, when you feel uncertain and unsure about, which way to go, and we all have that. Those miracles in Scripture are designed for you to be able to go back and read them and remind yourself that there is hope. You're supposed to go back and read those things and allow those stories to lift you up. Allow those stories to remind you that there's a God. Allow those stories to give you faith in the next step that you're about to take. That's why God did these miracles in the first place, right? To encourage everyone's faith. Miracles don't exist for the purpose of the person who got the miracle. They exist to show everyone who God is and how powerful God is. All these stories are written down so that you may continue to believe that Jesus is Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing in him you may have life and power in his name. And that's really important for all of us, because the world we live in is a hard place sometimes, isn't it? We live in a world that sometimes feels like it's full of hate and greed and sickness and violence and death. And miracles remind us that there is a God. Miracles remind us that there is a God who is bigger than any of that. Miracles remind us that there is always hope. Miracles remind us that hate and greed and violence and death don't have the last say. When you read the story of Lazarus in John chapter 10 and he gets raised from the life, you're not supposed to feel sad that your grandpa didn't get raised to life. You're supposed to feel excited that death doesn't have the last say in our world, right? When you read some of these crazy Old Testament stories of the people of God going up against a vast army and somehow they overcome them, you're not supposed to think, "Oh, why doesn't that happen in my life?" You're supposed to think, you know what, there is hope. With God, even the little things can prevail with God. The same God who did those miracles in the Bible is the same God who's doing miracles today. He's the same God who sent his son Jesus into the world to win the world back to him. He's the same God who died on a cross to save us from our sin and our mess and our failure. He's the same God who rose from that dead to give us hope and purpose and a future. Miracles are God's way of getting our attention and saying, "I'm real, I'm alive, I have power over everything, and I'm the only one worth following." On the the seat that you came in on today is a page of some miracles in Scripture. It's by far not all the miracles in Scripture, it's just a few. But I'm giving them to you because you might want to take these home and read some of those stories and remind yourself who God is. Again, not reading them thinking, oh, darn it, none of that happens in my life, but read them to encourage your faith. Read them to remind yourself who God is, to remind yourself what He's capable of, to remind yourself that He is worth following. All these miracles were written down so that you may continue to believe that Jesus is Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing in Him, you will have life and power in His name. This is episode 1 of our little miracles series. Next week in episode 2, we're going to talk more about miracles in today's world and about sort of our response to and our role, if you like, in seeing miracles happen then. So I'd encourage you, come back. The message this week will be up on YouTube and on your podcasts by Tuesday or Wednesday, so you can share it with people and get them to listen to it before you bring them back for next week. Miracles are exciting, folks. They're real and they're powerful and they point to who God is and to what He can do.